We are joined today on the Unmeasured podcast by Unmeasured Royalty. Literally, the person who is co hosting this episode with me is the person who came up with the name Unmeasured for Unmeasured. None of this would exist if it was not for her. Allie Lehman, welcome to the Unmeasured
Hi,
podcast. I'm so happy that you're here with us.
thanks for having me. I kind of forgot that I helped you name Unmeasured until this moment.
You totally
I
picked the
got
name.
goosebumps.
Yeah, this is all because of you.
Well, I feel like I took what you were trying to do and I'm like, what's the best name for this? And it fit so well.
Well, that's one of your incredible gifts, and you have many, is that you take what's in someone's brain and you take what's in someone's heart and you literally bring it into reality. For anyone who does not know Allie, she is the co-founder of the Wonder Jam, the managing partner of Wonderly. She is an artist and a lunch fan. And in Wonderly, in your agency, you do branding and web design and so much of that for businesses. And so for
Yeah.
Unmeasured, not only did you come up with the name, but you did all the branding. You literally created the website, you created the entire platform. And that's been true of anything I've ever created entrepreneurially. Like you have always been the person who takes it from an idea into reality and have always
Oh,
been the one like that connects with the vision. And I think nobody does that like you. You're so talented.
thank you. Thank you. It's hearing when people are like, that was what I was envisioning, but I didn't know how to make it happen, I think is one of my favorite pieces of feedback. And it feels really connected to a lot of the values, like our set values at our company, and one of them being really present with people. I think that when you can actually sit and listen and let their words kind of like absorb into your brain and all of that, it's actually a lot easier when you're not trying to do something that's only trendy or really popular. It feels really authentic to you. So our mission statement we established this year, actually, even though I think it's been true, is we help people express themselves authentically. And I think that is, it could be true of so many things. It could be a logo or a website and all of the extra stuff too.
It's so amazing. That is absolutely what you do. And even with the podcast art for this podcast, when you sent me the visuals, I was like, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. That's
Yeah.
exactly what I
Yeah.
wanted. And I didn't
Oh,
even know and I didn't even know what I wanted it to look like, but you did.
yeah.
And it's been so cool to get to work together over the years because I think working with you has been almost like a front row seat to how other people's brains are like so different than ours. I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
wow, Allie's brain can do things that like my brain cannot do. And it's just so incredible to get to work with someone who sees things and thinks about things in a different way. Like it's so expansive to get to do that. So it's
Oh,
amazing to
I
get
love it.
to
Thank
get to
you.
have you here. And I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for you. That's the understatement of the century.
Thanks, Simi. I feel your reflection on seeing how other people, how their brains work is so important and something that I didn't have or I wasn't open to, I think, like early in my career or adulthood. So and is so expansive. So I completely agree.
I love it. Well, we are going to be speaking of other people, we're going to be talking about other people today.
We are.
The question that came in from a listener is, why do you think the idea of disappointing someone in a relationship we hold close is something that feels so scary? I'm trying to work through this in therapy and I'm curious about your thoughts. So this listener wants to know, why is it so hard to feel like we're disappointing people and just navigating all of that? I
Yeah.
think this is something that is so surprising to me about adulthood. It's one of those things where I'm like, wow, no one prepared me for this part
I
of
know.
adulthood with relationships that naturally change, Then you have like professional relationships, right?
Yeah.
So you're navigating like the personal and the professional,
Yeah.
and also trying to become yourself.
Yeah.
And maybe you haven't always felt like I'm saying you as in like the collective
The
you.
people, the
Yeah,
people.
the people haven't always felt like we
Totally.
are maybe true to ourselves, or we didn't know ourselves fully. So we couldn't, be fully expressed in that way. And it's like you're getting to know yourself and you want to
Yeah.
show up authentically. And then that's maybe different than people have been
Oh
used to
my gosh.
experiencing you
Right.
in the past. It is, it's such a challenging part of adulthood.
It is, to me, the most frightening and scary part of adulthood, possibly, besides just everything out of our control.
Yeah.
Um, when we talked about this topic and that question, I was like, is a huge fear in my life. And I'm also working through it in therapy, like the listener mentioned. Um, and I love that you pointed to the fact that being our authentic self changes. Like, even when you think of what disappointment is, it's someone's expectation, or it's fallen short of the expectation, or made them sad, or they have different feelings about it. And you think the solve is, well, like, I'll just be my most authentic self all the time. And I love that you brought up that might look different 3 years later or 2 weeks later. And yeah, so I feel like we could talk a ton about this, and we will. But my first note was, yeah, this is a huge trigger for me. It's like if someone says like I'm disappointed, it feels worse than someone who says they're angry or confused um or yeah, any of the really like strong emotional words. And so and I think a lot of it probably for me is tied to being rewarded as a child for like doing the right thing, being really good, following the rules, um, like not expressing a ton of emotion. And this is true of like parents, guardians, adults in your life, school, things like that. And so, and I'm sure that's so true for so many people, right? It's like you spent that whole time. For you, does it feel like something that has always been a fear, like something you want to avoid, or is it like worse now?
I think it's definitely something that I think I've always experienced on some level. Where I experience anxiety is relationally. So
Mm-hmm.
my anxiety comes up in when it comes to social connection, right? So
Mm,
basically, you know, for most of my life, 99.9% of the time, my anxiety is around any like social connection.
yeah.
And I think why it feels so triggering for me to feel like I'm disappointing someone
Mm-hmm.
is that w- what my inner tape that plays that's
Mm-hmm.
not helpful says is like, you did something wrong
Mm-hmm.
and now I think you're annoying, or you did something wrong
Mm.
and now I don't want to be around you, or you did something wrong and now I don't like you
Like
anymore.
I'm out. See you
Yep,
later.
totally.
Yeah.
You made a mistake. I'm done.
Yeah.
And so for me, thinking of someone in a relationship, and this question is about a close relationship. It's very hard for
Right.
me in that, but I have even had moments in time, and this has gotten so much better, and it's a noticeable shift for me. But like even online,
Mm-hmm.
feeling like
Mm-hmm.
people
Mm-hmm.
are going to be disappointed if I used to be like this and now I'm like this. Like I used to share
Yeah.
a lot more about my personal life and my private life and my family life online. And at the time, that was authentic and that felt very natural for me.
Yeah.
I don't want to do that anymore. That doesn't feel authentic or natural to me. I want my online space to be much more an extension of my professional work.
Yeah.
And even when I started to kind of like dip my toe into that because I
Mm-hmm.
knew that that's what was right for me and where I wanted to go. I
Mm-hmm.
would panic that like people are going to be disappointed. People aren't going to want to be here
Yeah,
anymore. They're not going to like me anymore. So even like with strangers on the internet, it was triggering
I
for me.
know.
It's
Isn't it
so
wild?
wild.
It's wild that there are probably times where people on the internet are on the same level of concern as the people who we're close to.
Yes.
And that's really sad to me, like for
Yep.
myself, that it
I'm
would,
sad for us right
I'm really
now.
sad. It shouldn't be like that. We don't know, you don't have a close relationship with people. Um, I, because of that specific question, and so that's me admitting that I also get concerned about people who I'm not close with being disappointed. And, you hear people say, like, make a list of people whose opinions really matter. And I think what this listener's asking is like, what happens when those people are disappointed? I think that feeling of abandonment or like avoidance or, um, yeah, just the relationship crumbling is like a very valid concern. I think it would be silly for us to not feel emotions about that. Like if you disappointed someone and they were like, I don't want to be your friend anymore, like that would be really sad and really hard. Um, I think I don't, I, oh, how I think about it is I don't always feel like I was equipped with the tools to work through how to go through the messy parts of relationships. Like, how do you go through a really tough conversation and like come out of it better? I think I see this most exemplified with my husband, Adam. Like, if you fight in a healthy relationship or have an argument or work through an issue, it can, like, you can actually come out stronger. Your communication is better. You can think of each other and how you um, receive feedback better, all of that. But it really, as I was reflecting on this question, it made me think about what does it say about a relationship when it can't withstand conflict? And I think that's something that we kind of like pre-grieve. If you know that this relationship can't handle it, it's like, what was this relationship the whole time?
I love that you said it's very natural to have emotions around disappointing someone who you care about, of
Yeah.
course, and natural that if they do say, like, I don't want to be in this friendship or this relationship or anything anymore, that's also very painful.
Yeah.
And I think as you were sharing that, I'm like, oh, I just realized something about myself that I had not realized before, which is the reasons why I've tried to avoid that in the past rather than saying, like, this is a part of relationships and
Mm,
this can be done in a healthy way. I've tried to avoid it because of fear that disappointment equals the end.
yeah.
And I don't want
So
that to be
avoid
the end.
it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's, like, so hard, and it's something that, like, changes in relationship dynamics are very anxiety provoking for me, so I'm just like,
Yeah.
"Well, I'll avoid disappointing someone so that I can avoid the change in relationship dynamics so that I can avoid feeling anxious," and there's so much avoidance
Yeah.
there, but they're also having disappointment is a very natural part of being in a relationship with someone,
Yeah.
whatever kind of relationship it might be. And
Yeah.
I love that you brought up that, like, in your marriage, that can happen and you can work through it and the relationship can get stronger.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that I also experience with Tim, where
Hmm.
we will just have very honest, direct conversations, and
Hmm.
then we learn how to love each other better, and it really does make it better, but I
Yeah.
don't feel so safe in disappointment in other relationships
Right.
yet.
Right. I think one thing I thought of while you were talking was if you happen to live in the same like home as a significant other, there's a little bit of um and I'm going to kind of shift to comparing it to someone who maybe lives across town or across the country and you're close with. That distance can like start to permeate in the relationship a little bit easier, where you maybe have that tough conversation where someone's disappointed, you have a conversation, it feels good, and then a couple of days pass and you're like, what if they're still mad? Or um what if we just stop talking? Like, and I think that when you're physically present with people in your life, whether they're, a part of your community in where you live, or like, extended family or things like that, there's a little bit of that, like, I'm going to see them again. I'm going to have to face this in person, or I'm going to see them at the next thing. And that forced distance can, I think, be also scary because you don't have as many of those check-ins. And I think that that plays into, at least for me, if the disappointment is there, it's been expressed and we're all aware of it, making sure that I have the time to invest in like those check-ins, making sure that I have time to just give that attention to that relationship. The caller, when they said they were talking with their therapist, I actually brought this to my therapist before we talked about having this conversation. And I explained 2 instances where I felt like I disappointed people that I respect. I'm not extremely close with them, but I felt that that was true. And I explained the situations, and my therapist was like, yeah, you messed up. And I was like, oh yeah, no, you're right. And I realized I was really thankful, one, for a therapist because they'll keep it real. But a lot of times I think the discourse online and just like out in the open is, well, you needed to disappoint that person, or like you needed to do what was right for you. And it was really good for me to just hear someone be like, yeah, you probably made them sad. And I was like, oh, you're right. And she's like, I think sometimes you think living life, the goal is to avoid making mistakes, and it's not. And I was like, yeah, the goal is to avoid making mistakes, And she's like, uh-huh.
I feel like that's one of those therapy memes on Instagram where it's like, and I said this and my therapist said no.
Nope, that's not it. I was like, oh, so I should stop living this way. And she's like, yeah.
But that's such an amazing point about living with the intent of I'm trying everything I can to not make a mistake.
Yeah.
When the flip side to it is just being in relationships with
Yeah.
other
It's like,
people.
yeah,
Sometimes you're going to do things that hurt them, and we don't have to justify it through some like self-care lens. We can just say,
right.
okay, I made a mistake
Mm-hmm.
and I repair now, and I
Yeah.
own it, and I say I'm sorry. And hopefully it's an emotionally mature relationship where there can be forgiveness and
Yeah.
mutual understanding that like we all make mistakes. This time it
Yeah.
was you, next time it will probably be me. And not that we
Totally.
want to hurt each other, but
Mm-hmm.
we are only human. I
Yeah.
also think for me, around the making a mistake thing or doing something wrong, that when I feel like I've done something wrong, it's like a waterfall of shame comes over me. And I think that there's also a desire to avoid feeling shame,
Mm-hmm.
and that if I do something wrong and upset someone else, it's so interesting how in that moment I almost think I'm almost more consumed by the shame that I'm feeling
Yeah.
than I am about connecting with them and repairing with
Yeah.
them in that moment where it's like, okay,
Mm-hmm. You've made it
emotionally,
about
yeah,
ourselves.
yeah,
Yeah.
totally,
Yeah.
totally.
Yeah. It's fascinating to think of that waterfall,
Mhm.
the kind of spiral, if you will, like, oh my gosh, these are all the different things that I'm doing wrong. It reminds me of that I messed up in this way. And it can be very probably disorienting to the other person if this is expressed in front of them, where they want some connection. And like you said, you're essentially denying that. Um, but yeah, it's like if you think of the healthiest relationships you have, there is probably disappointment present at times. And I have found that by people pleasing, which I think is a tactic to avoid disappointing others, leaves me feeling alone. Like people don't know you or people don't know me. And so I had that realization a few years ago where I was like, where has that gotten me? Where has people pleasing gotten me? Not, it's not like I find myself with 100 best friends. I don't think I could maintain 100 best friends, but it's safe when it feels like you can't puncture anything, but then you also are like in your own bubble.
Yep.
Um, and I think that feels really lonely. I think we'd feel more connected if we were disappointing more people and like
Yeah,
could move through it.
absolutely. And people pleasing is so lonely. And
Mm-hmm.
it's, obviously there's a positive intention underneath it.
Mm-hmm.
And, I think it's a controlling coping mechanism to try to not have to deal with all the stuff that we're talking about that
Yeah.
is sort of inevitable if you're having really like authentic relationships.
Yeah.
But I also think that when the goal is to people please, or when the goal is
Mm-hmm.
to not make mistakes, personally, I have a lot of trouble really being present
Mm-hmm.
because if I was sitting here worrying about, okay, I want to say the perfect thing, or I want to make sure I say the right thing, or I want to make sure I respond to Allie like in the way that is going to make her really happy,
Mm-hmm.
I'm not even like listening to what you're
No.
saying.
Yeah.
And it so takes you out of the moment. And I
Mm-hmm.
think it hurts relationships in that way too, where you miss out on on really good stuff. And
Yeah.
I think if you spend too much time in life people pleasing, always wanting to do everything perfectly, that my experience has been that resentment also builds in relationships
Mm-hmm.
because maybe other people are being like slightly more authentic, right? And so being more human.
Yeah.
And then it's like, well, I can't believe that like they said that, or I can't believe that they did that. Or we start to project these
Mm-hmm.
unhealthy expectations on other people. So it's like we
Oh
don't
my
feel good
gosh.
inside ourselves.
Yeah.
We don't feel good about like anyone in our life. And to your point, like where does that get us?
Oh my gosh. You're so right. It's like I when I'm holding myself to these unhealthy expectations, I'm so critical of other people because, and you don't even sometimes say that out loud, like they're being really authentic and I'm not. It's just like it's internal, this feeling of friction.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that was like kind of a mind blowing moment where I was like, you were talking and I'm like, oh my gosh, yeah, we are basically saying like you should be living according to the way that I am forcing myself to live. Um, and that resentment or jealousy is so there.
Yes.
Wild. Yeah. Yeah. And I even think of like so then the idea of being authentic, if I'm authentic, then people's expectations will be more aligned because they'll know who I am. I think that I would even love to speak to, and you and I could speak to close relationships. I think, especially with family or extended family, where people knew you really well at different stages of your life. And as you become more of who you are today, it's really hard to set those expectations with people, or you don't get a chance to be your authentic self. And I have recently started to say to, friends or family, this idea of it seems so appealing to sit someone down and be like, this is who I am. These are all the things that I think. This is everything I believe politically and worldview wise. This is how I spend my time. Here's my sleep schedule. You want to just be like, this is who I am. Can we all get on the same page? It doesn't have to be this like emotional thing. And I laugh to myself when I think of sitting someone down and being like, I'm going to update you on who I am today.
You're
But
like,
it
I'll
also
send
sounds
you
kind
my
of great.
bio before I get there.
So I have a deck and I'm going to put it up on the TV. But honestly, sometimes that feels relaxing where I'm like, I would actually love to do that.
Yes. That is one thing where not that I think anyone necessarily in my life is, following like my work or anything on social media. Not that they have to, but sometimes I'm like, well, if they're like remotely following me, maybe they at least have an idea for how I've changed or like
Yeah,
how I may have evolved. Like sometimes I
totally.
even like will run into someone from when I was way younger and I'm just like, I can't even imagine your memories of me and what
Right.
you might be thinking about me and how am I the
Right.
same or different than that right now?
That's so funny. It's true though. I didn't think that becoming an adult would be this almost like tiered file system of the different versions of myself. And I actually forget sometimes versions of myself where I'll be like, I can't believe this thing. And a friend or Adam will be like, you used to do that. Or like, you used to be like that. And I'm like, really? Like, yeah. So I think it's really funny to try to keep track of it. I almost think it's for the best that we sometimes discard and forget.
I was I literally had this thought yesterday. I was washing dishes. I was at the sink. And
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what sparked it for me, but I had the thought of like, wow, I'm so glad I have a bad memory.
Same. I
I'm
can't
so
imagine
glad.
if I was haunted by the things that I once said or did
Thank God I've forgotten
or
it all.
thought. I do not remember at all. Adam actually said to me the other day, "Oh, that was like I had fun doing that thing yesterday." And I was like, what were we doing? Like I truly forget that. So, yeah, I definitely don't remember what I was like in 2010. Um but yeah, I think that authentic self thing is really um it can be difficult for me because I know I will change again. And so how loud do I want to be about the things that I am right now? I think there are things that probably unite and are like a thread throughout our many versions, but yeah.
I know you mentioned that it didn't feel like there were a lot of examples of sort of like conflict in relationship and then it being okay, like
Yeah.
disappointing each other. We talk through it and we move forward, the same or maybe even better than
Yeah.
before growing up. And I relate to that. And whether there were examples going on around me and I just didn't have the awareness, or maybe because of my memory, I've just completely forgotten them.
Yeah. You were like
Or
surrounded by it, but you're like, I don't remember.
there were 10 examples every day. I just can't
Yeah.
remember a single one of them. Or if really it was something that, was either going on in adult relationships and I just wasn't exposed to, or it
Right.
really wasn't happening. I don't know. But I will say that I feel like I can't recall a lot of
Mm-hmm.
scenarios where I saw that as a positive thing.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, how do you feel like you are doing that differently, like in your adulthood? Like, have you
Mm.
found examples of that in other people, or do you have certain tools that you're using to kind of approach these conversations that make you feel more supported? Because I do think that a big part of this is us collectively coming to terms with the fact that like this is part of having real honest relationships.
Yeah.
And even though it does feel scary and there might be some, shame to let go of, that if it's
Mm.
going to be a real honest, emotionally mature relationship, there's going to be disappointment and there's going to have to be processing, through that.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering what's been helpful for you with that as you're like looking to do this maybe differently or maybe just in a way that we don't remember that it was being done.
Yeah. Right. We were taught it, but we forgot it. No.
Totally.
Yeah. One of my first thoughts when you were talking and asking that was, and this is from my perspective, I guess, not as much from other people telling me that they were disappointed, but in having those tough conversations. And so for me, I would say the last couple of years, one of my go-to thoughts when I'm about to have that conversation is coming forward in the conversation vulnerably and saying, I have a lot of anxiety around this, and I just need to like share why. Or, I was even talking to my sister about something, and I'm like, I realized I had this lesson in my 30s so far. I can logically explain a lot of things, but at the end of the day, I have a feeling or feelings. And so I can try to make it really logical for someone else to understand, or I can just say, this, I don't like this feeling that I have. Again, I have anxiety around this. This hurt my feelings. And I think people are really softened to that. I think that if someone really cares about you, the logical explanations are a little like that meme where that person's looking at all of the like charts and like math, and you're like, I don't fully like relate, or I don't follow. So sharing that emotion up front, I think, has been almost, you can't argue it, and you can technically argue how your brain logically thinks about something. And then I think being very intentional about the timing. Not that you can't just say something in the moment, but I remember going on a walk with my mom it was like the month of January, and it was winter, and we were like walking, and she didn't want to make assumptions, but she was like, do you think you're going to have kids? And I was like, oh my gosh, this is great. I've been wanting to tell my mom that I'm not going to have children. And I felt like the timing was actually really thoughtful of her. Like, I really like talking to people when I'm on walks or hikes. It felt she was really relaxed about it. And I thought it was one of the first times where I thought, I do think the way and when and what and method in which we talk to someone about something that's like not the most fun or might come with a lot of emotions is a really thoughtful way to be. Where it doesn't feel like so manipulative, where you're like, I got you here, to confront you. But yeah, I think a lot of that comes from vulnerability and like actually calling on the things that you know about that person. And, it's not like my mom asked me that like at the Thanksgiving dinner table with everyone around or something. So that would be like the first thing that comes to mind. I don't know if you feel like you have other kind of tools or guides when it comes to working through the tougher parts of adult relationships.
I love all of those so much. Something that a our therapist said to Tim and I when we were in like couples therapy before we got
Mm-hmm.
married was to assume positive intention. And I think that that is something that in my marriage where I feel the most safe and confident to have these harder conversations. And like,
Yeah.
I never worry that a tough conversation is going to mean the end. I know I'm
Yeah.
like, we both want to love each other well. There's that
Mm-hmm.
positive intention. It's like, I always assume that
Yeah.
Tim wants to love me well. I think he always assumes that I want to love him well. And so
Yeah.
there isn't a fear or a defensiveness necessarily like
Mm-hmm.
going into those conversations. And
Mm-hmm.
I think I've tried to sort of extract that because I'm like, I think that's like the secret sauce of why those, and we've had a lot of practice. Like, I've never
Yeah.
had to
Yeah.
practice this many direct conversations with anyone
Can
in
you?
my life.
Yeah,
Yeah,
for sure.
totally. So I try to extract that and to lead with my intention to
Mm.
the person. So to say,
Like
like,
saying it.
yeah, like
Mm-hmm.
if we were having a tough conversation, I might say, I love you so much. You're such an important friend to me.
Mm-hmm.
And our friendship is so valuable that I want to share something that's been feeling kind of hard for me.
Yeah.
Um, because I, because
Because that's true.
because this is like so important to me,
Yeah.
like leading with our relationship's important to me, or I like to feel close to you.
Yeah.
And I have been feeling distant or whatever it might be, leading with
Yeah.
that. And I don't know if it helps the other person, but it helps me to kind of set that intention ahead of time. And I know if someone's saying
Mhm.
something to me, it helps me to know, oh, this person like wants to be close to me. And this is a hurdle that we need to overcome
Yeah.
to get to that place. I will also share, I don't know that this is good advice, but it's like the therapy memes. No,
You're like, our therapist listens, like, no.
not good advice. I will say that I have had to share in the last month, there have been 2 times where something was just I was so hurt, and I
Mhm.
felt like it was, like, eating me up in the
Yeah.
inside, and I was so emotional that I just knew if I tried to share it, that I was gonna explode into tears, and I
Mm.
wasn't gonna be able to articulate myself,
Yeah.
and these are 2 relationships that people that I'm, like, very, very close with, and I wrote a text message, and I, like, really
Yeah.
clearly articulated myself, and I said, "I'm sending this in a text message because I'm feeling really emotional. I want to talk to you about
Yeah.
this. I was just afraid that I wouldn't be able to get my thoughts out clearly."
In the way that you wanted.
Yes, and
Yeah.
tried to write it in, like, a very loving way, and wrote it in a text message, and then we were able to have a conversation, and that went really well. I wouldn't do that in just any relationship,
Right.
but it
Right.
really did help because I don't think I would have been able to so clearly articulate how I was feeling and why I was feeling
Just
that way.
verbally.
Yeah,
I am with you,
because
Simi. I'm the same way. Writing is so much better for me. And I think that advice is good. I
oh,
think it's,
good.
yeah, I approve. I'm not a
Amazing.
therapist, but I think it's great. I think people don't realize that there are different ways of communicating, and you can be really thoughtful in writing.
I agree with that so much, and while this episode cannot substitute actual therapeutic advice, I
Definitely
feel
not.
like
But you're getting the
disclaimer,
benefit of some investments from us.
we have invested in our own mental health, and we are here to share
Lots
what
of
we've
money.
learned.
Yeah, yeah.
I, I am someone who gets so emotional
Hmm.
anytime that I am doing something that I'm really afraid of, and
Same.
confrontation is something that I am
Hmm.
very afraid of. And so I mean, I don't think I have these conversations other than with Tim now where it's like so practiced where I'm
Yeah,
not just like bursting into tears and it's literally just my nervous system is just
yeah,
responding
yeah,
to like the fear that is going on inside.
yeah. Oh, for sure. It's, and yet I think that giving a glimpse of that emotion is really good for the other person to know. Even you saying, like, I need to share this, or I would feel too emotional, just relaying this to you for the first time in person or on the phone. And I, I think that in kind of a connection with the conversation I had with my therapist about disappointing people, she really challenged me to say, don't sit on that for so long if you're disappointed, or if you feel like you were the one that maybe caused a little bit of that to happen. Not sitting in that anxiousness, but giving yourself a good due date for resolving it or addressing someone. And so all of these little, I think, tips help me, and I'm assuming other people, not spend weeks after weeks living in this by yourself. Um, if it's a real relationship and it goes two ways, I think that someone shouldn't be holding that all on their own, and it can be shared.
It's such a heavy thing to carry around. I
Yeah.
I also really appreciate what you shared before about, moments maybe of feeling like you might have disappointed someone and upon reflection being like, "Okay, I made a mistake." And that
Mm-hmm.
and that might have left someone feeling disappointed.
Mm-hmm.
And I also think there are moments in time where someone can be disappointed with us and we didn't actually do anything
Yeah.
wrong. And I think we have to be able to hold the sort of duality of I feel sad that this person's disappointed or
Mm-hmm.
whatever the emotion might be, while also saying like I have reflected very
Mm-hmm.
honestly and I don't feel that I did anything wrong in this situation. And
Yeah.
sometimes we can still say I actually didn't make a mistake here,
Yeah.
but or I don't feel that I made a mistake. I don't have anything I would be able to like authentically apologize about here.
Right.
And I'm still really bummed out that this person feels disappointed in me.
Yeah.
And like I think that
That is
that
such
can happen
a good
too.
point. Yeah. And someone else, we can't control how someone else feels. And someone could have an incorrect expectation of how we are supposed to show up in their lives or make assumptions. And I think that that is also so true that you can extend that easily into everyone on the internet, you know. Um, it's not like us expressing ourselves or like a subscription that they pay for, you know? And
Mm-hmm.
so if I am my most authentic out in like the open meadow of the world,
Totally.
there's going to be a ton of people who are disappointed. And it says a lot about everyone. Like it says, okay, Allie, you're like being really clear about who you are. And it says a lot about someone who is offended by that.
Totally. Who feels like you owe them to be a
Like,
certain
be
way.
what? Yeah, like
I
a cookie
know.
cutter or something. I don't, it's
It's
very odd.
so wild. Like
Mm-hmm.
sometimes I'm like the audacity of
Yeah.
people.
Yeah.
It's truly so wild. And the internet is like a wild meadow.
Lots going on.
So much going on out there.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if you feel this way, but for me, I feel like the closer the relationship,
Mm-hmm.
the more the more of like an alignment there needs to be. So in terms of
Yeah.
expectations,
Yeah.
like if I have a dear friend and because of schedules or where we live or whatever it might be, we see each other like once every 2 years. There
Right.
isn't that much we have to align on other than like once every 2 years, maybe
Totally.
we hang out at the same time in the same place. But like
Yeah.
when I think about my, like maybe closer friendships or more intimate friendships or like my
Yeah.
relationship with Tim or family members, it's like you kind of have to be more aligned on expectations.
Yeah.
And I do think that as we age and
Mm-hmm.
we grow and we evolve, that sometimes we were aligned on expectations, but then
Yeah.
maybe like this person feels like we need to be talking every single day and hanging out every weekend. And this person over here is like, oh, that isn't what
I
yeah,
can't do that. Yeah.
totally. And that
Yeah.
there can be disappointment there too. And I think that sometimes in those scenarios, it's like, again, nobody did anything wrong, but there might just be a natural like growing apart that happens.
Yeah.
And that is really sad, but also it is okay.
Yeah. And like addressing it instead of one person feeling unable to fulfill and the other person feeling abandoned, I think is, or how could you meet in the middle? Like, how could you say, okay, well, I can't talk that much, but I would love to hang out with you in this way. And I think that even is just not common. I think generally we stay out of each other's lives out of like politeness a lot.
Mhm.
And it would be really interesting to even look to the next decade of our lives and say, what does it look like to be a little bit more up in someone's business, in a respectful way, and like, again, keep that communication open. But um, yeah, instead of like, kind of arm's length and then being really frustrated when that closeness isn't there. Um, and I'm still figuring that part out though. So
But I love that, Allie, because I think to your point about, well, maybe we could meet in the middle. I do think that people feel either through politeness, of not wanting, well,
Mhm.
I don't want to like ask for more, or I don't want to
Yeah.
say that I need something different, or out of being offended or
Yeah.
taking something personally or creating a story, but then not talking to the other person about it is like, well,
For
then never
sure.
mind. I guess you don't want to be my friend anymore. I guess you don't
The
like
stories
this or
we tell
that.
ourselves. Yeah.
Yes. And that those things can get, can get like really loud in our mind. And then we make decisions based off of that, where if you just had a conversation, it's like, oh, well, we could meet in the middle, and
Yeah.
we, again, like the intention is there. We love each other. We want to have connection. And this is what connection looks like in this chapter of our
Yeah.
relationship. I am all for us getting more up in each other's business. Like I think that's so great.
Yeah. And I think that the capacity for that is really affected by like life circumstances
Yep.
too. Like, I'm sure we've all been in those situations where your friend is in a very different phase. And it's really cool if you all manage, not all, but if a lot of your friendships and close relationships can get aligned on that or be in similar situations, it's really cool. I was smiling to myself earlier because when we were talking about the stories, I was like, Simi, we're both very creative. The stories we tell ourselves, the imagination that we can all have is astounding.
It's so true. Really quickly, remember the story that you told yourself before you met you met me for the first
See, I have a wild imagination.
time.
I in what 2012,
I don't know. In
2011,
1995.
right? When we were 5 years old. No, it was early, I'll say 2012.
That
2012.
perfect.
Great. In 2012, Simi inquired.
Tim. Tim
Tim
inquired.
did. Oh, Tim.
Yep.
Tim
Mhm.
inquired and on the form of our website asking for inquiring about a website. And I think he mentioned that he was in local theater.
Which he was.
And I just assumed that him and Simi were old.
Well, and I think he was like, I'm in local theater and my wife and I want to start a gardening blog or something.
Yeah, I was like, oh, these are like, and okay, I'm older now. So, but I'm like, these people are way older than me. So we went to your house. I went to your house, which is
Mhm.
funny. I really trusted people back then. I met all my friends on Twitter and they opened the door and I'm like, oh my gosh, they're my age.
It was such a pleasant surprise. And we've
Oh
been
my gosh.
we've been all up in each other's business ever
Yeah,
since.
yeah. I'm so glad those old people reached out. Yeah. So yes, know that everyone else's minds are spinning a story. And wouldn't it be cool if you could stop it for them and say, even like say when things are great, like, I really appreciate you as a friend or a partner, or things like that, instead of hoping that they pick up on all the subtle signs.
I love that so much, Allie. Thank you. This was such an awesome conversation, and I
Loved
appreciate you
it.
so much.
Thank you.